They laughed behind her back, a cleaning lady, invited to a millionaire's gala as a cruel joke. But when she walked in wearing a stunning gold gown, heads turned, jaws dropped, and the room fell silent. No one saw this coming. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. She was the black cleaning lady who floated through the corridors like a quiet breeze, always in her navy uniform, hair tucked under a plain scarf, and a tired smile that never quite reached her eyes. For 6 long years, Clarice had polished the gold-trimmed staircases, mopped the floors of penthouse suites, and dusted the 10-foot chandeliers that dangled like icy jewelry above the ballroom. While millionaires waltzed past her in tailored suits and glittering gowns, she stayed invisible, always 2 steps behind the lives she would never live. Some called her sweet. Others barely saw her, but no one ever called her guest.so. When her name appeared on the official guest list for Hawthorne Estates' most exclusive annual charity gala, printed in cursive on ivory cardstock, sealed with gold foil, Clarice thought it was a mistake. She stared at the invitation for nearly a minute, her calloused fingers trembling. Had someone dropped this by accident? But no, it had her name on it. Clarice Evans. Hand-delivered. Signed by Tiffany Langston herself, the estate's most glamorous resident and the chairwoman of the event. Tiffany, whose stilettos clicked like power, whose perfume arrived before she did. Clarice blinked. She had cleaned Tiffany's mirrors. She had picked up after her parties. Why would Tiffany invite her? What Clarice didn't know was that it wasn't kindness. It was cruelty dressed in designer ink. Tiffany had never thought of Clarice as anything more than background noise. One day, while sipping champagne with her inner circle, the idea slipped out like a joke. We should invite the cleaning lady to the gala, she giggled, twirling her diamond bracelet. Can you imagine? Laughter exploded like popped bubbles. She'd probably show up in her mop bucket. One guest snorted. She'll never come. Another smirked. But if she does, oh, the pictures we'll get. The whole thing was meant to be a prank, a performance, a punchline. But Clarice had other plans on the night of the gala. The chandeliers sparkled like stars, and the estate buzzed with the scent of luxury, roses, truffle oil, and money. The marble floors were polished to a mirror shine. Violinists played near the entrance. Guests in velvet and silk drifted in, laughter trailing behind them like perfume. And then, silence. Heels stopped clicking. Wine glasses paused midair, because standing in the doorway, framed by golden light, was Clarice. Not Clarice the cleaning lady. Clarice the woman. She wore a floor-length gown the color of midnight. Elegant, simple, and unmistakably regal. Her hair flowed in soft curls down her shoulders. Around her neck was a delicate string of pearls, once owned by her grandmother. And on her face was no tired smile, but a quiet confidence. She held herself tall, straight, like a woman who knew exactly who she was. People whispered. Tiffany's face stiffened into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Clarice walked slowly across the marble floor, her heels echoing louder than the violins. Guests parted like waves, unsure whether to be embarrassed, amused, or impressed. But Clarice wasn't there to perform for them. She walked with grace, greeted the waitstaff with warmth, complimented the violinist, and even dropped a generous check into the charity box. One that surprised even Tiffany, because what none of them knew was that Clarice had been saving not just pennies, but pride. She had worked nights at the estate, but she also freelanced during the day. She'd taken courses online. She'd been slowly growing her own eco-cleaning business. She had clients now, contracts, a future. And tonight? Tonight was not their joke. It was her arrival. By the end of the evening, whispers turned into admiration. Did you see her necklace? She started her own company. I heard. She looks like royalty. Clarice never mentioned the prank. She didn't need to. Her presence was the response. As she left the gala, head held high, she passed Tiffany, who stood frozen, her champagne flute trembling just slightly. Clarice smiled. A real one this time. Thank you for the invitation, she said softly, then turned and walked into the night. From that day on, Clarice was no longer invisible at Hawthorne Estates. She wasn't just the cleaning lady. She was the woman who showed up, not in a uniform, but like a queen, and they would never forget her again. Clarice stared at the invitation for days, She kept it tucked in a kitchen drawer, beneath bills and grocery receipts, as if hiding it would protect her from disappointment. But every night, after her shift at Hawthorne Estates, she'd take it out again and trace the gold lettering with her finger that it was probably a prank. She knew that. People like Tiffany Langston didn't send real invitations to people like her. People who scrubbed their bathrooms and dumped their trash. Still, something inside Clarice wouldn't let it go. A small, quiet voice. Fierce. Unshaken. Go. Show them who you are. What they didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask, was that Clarice had not always worn a janitor's uniform. Before life pressed her down, she had been an artist, a dreamer. Years ago, Clarice studied fashion design in Paris. She'd earned a scholarship to one of the top academies, sketching designs in coffee-stained notebooks and stitching fabric scraps into magic. Her specialty had been theater costuming, bold, dramatic gowns that danced under stage lights. She was talented. So talented that, for a while, she was booked every season, designing for opera houses and ballet companies. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Her mother fell ill back in the States. Cancer. Fast-moving. Clarice packed her scissors and sketchbooks and flew home to care for her. She used her savings for hospital bills, sold her sewing machine, paused her dreams. When her mother passed, grief took the last bit of fire she had left. Then came the hustle, temp jobs, night shifts, and finally, cleaning work. Hawthorne Estates paid steady, and she was good at it. Reliable. Invisible. For 6 years, no one asked who she had been before, but this invitation? This joke? It reignited something in her that had long been buried. Clarice walked to the back of her closet and reached for an old trunk that had gathered dust. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside was fabric, neatly folded silks, beadwork she'd never finished, and, wrapped carefully in tissue, a deep gold satin gown. She had made it years ago for herself. A dress she vowed she would wear one day. When success felt secure, when life was finally hers again, it had never seen the light of day. Until now. She pulled it out gently, as if lifting a memory. The seams were still perfect. The color shimmered, like sunlight trapped in cloth. It fit her, mostly, a few adjustments needed, here and there. So she set to work. Every evening after her shift, she turned on her old sewing lamp and stitched. She fixed the hem, reinforced the neckline, hand-sewed new beads into the bodice, each one catching light like tiny stars. Her hands remembered. Her soul remembered. She didn't need to buy elegance. She was elegance. When the gown was ready, Clarice stood in front of her mirror. She twisted her hair into elegant coils, the way her mother used to do for her recitals. She borrowed a pair of gold heels from her cousin and added a single-strand pearl necklace, a gift from a client during her design days. Tucked away all these years, she applied soft makeup, not too flashy, just enough to remind herself that she was more than tired eyes and worn hands. And then, she stepped back. What she saw in the mirror wasn't a cleaning lady. It wasn't the woman who kept her head down and her voice quiet. It was a queen. Not the kind born into royalty, but the kind forged by resilience. The kind who had been buried under bills and bleach, but never broken. Clarice smiled at her reflection. A slow, powerful smile. She didn't know what the night would bring. She didn't know if they'd laugh, if they'd stare, if someone would say the wrong thing and ruin everything. But for the first time in years, she wasn't shrinking. She was rising. She folded the invitation and placed it in her clutch, not because she needed proof she belonged, but as a reminder. They had invited her as a joke, but she was going to walk in like the punchline never landed. The ballroom glittered like a dream. Crystal chandeliers dripping light from the ceiling, live jazz humming from the corner, and golden trays of champagne floating through the room on the hands of white-gloved waiters. Guests mingled in sequins and silk, laughing beneath the glimmer, while camera flashes bounced off ice sculptures and velvet walls. The center of it all. Tiffany Langston stood radiant in a blood-red gown, surrounded by her usual circle of admirers. Her laugh, polished and hollow, carried through the crowd as she shared a story, likely exaggerated, maybe even invented, but no one dared question her. In this room, Tiffany was royalty. Until the air changed. The band didn't stop playing, but the notes felt suddenly slower, quieter. Conversations dimmed. Heads turned. There was a shift in the energy, subtle at first, like the hush before something sacred begins. Then, the grand double doors opened, and Clarice stepped in. Time froze. The golden gown shimmered as it caught the light, hugging her figure with tailored perfection. Her skin glowed, her curls were pinned with elegance, and her pearl necklace rested delicately across her collarbone. But it wasn't just her appearance that it was her presence. Clarice didn't just walk in. She arrived, chin lifted, shoulders back, a calm, quiet confidence in every step. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, not with arrogance, but with awareness. She was taking it all in, noticing every detail, the way she used to as a designer. The irony wasn't lost on her. These people had spent thousands to look expensive and still didn't come close. Gasps scattered like dominoes. Guests nudged one another, whispering behind crystal flutes. "Who is that? She looks like royalty. I've never seen her before." And then, Tiffany turned. She didn't recognize Clarice at first. Her perfectly arched brow lifted in curiosity, waiting for her brain to catch up with her eyes. Then it hit her. Her smile cracked, ever so slightly. Her voice, the one always so sharp and in control, faltered as she muttered, That's the cleaning woman." The silence around her deepened. Clarice didn't look in her direction. She didn't need to. Instead, she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, offering a soft, genuine thank you. Then she moved gracefully through the room, not pausing for stares or whispers, but not rushing either. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She simply was the scene. Men turned their heads. Women adjusted their posture. Even the photographers, unsure who she was but certain she mattered, began to snap photos. Clarice stopped near the back corner of the ballroom, a deliberate choice. She didn't need the center of attention. She simply wanted to observe, to exist fully, without apology, in a space meant to exclude her. A few brave guests approached, pretending they recognized her. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" one man said, too loudly. Clarice smiled politely. "It is now." Another woman in an emerald dress leaned in. "Darling, that gown, who designed it?" Clarice let the silence linger just enough. "I did," she said simply. "A long time ago." There was awe in the woman's face, mixed with shame for assuming otherwise. Meanwhile, Tiffany stood frozen by the champagne tower, gripping her glass like a lifeline. Her carefully planned evening, her cruel little prank, it had backfired. In front of everyone, Clarice wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't awkward. She wasn't even angry. She was powerful. And worse, she was being celebrated. Tiffany's friends murmured beside her, too afraid to say what they were all thinking. That maybe, just maybe, Tiffany had underestimated the woman she tried to mock. Clarice took another sip of champagne. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't have to explain her presence. Her existence in that room, in that gown, with that posture, was her answer to everything. She had taken their joke and turned it into a coronation. As the jazz picked up tempo again and guests returned to their champagne and chatter, something had shifted permanently in that ballroom. People would talk for days. But Clarice, she had already said everything she needed to, without saying a word. Among the glittering crowd and murmurs of disbelief stood Dorian Blackwell. He wasn't just any guest. He was a legend in the financial world. A reclusive millionaire investor with a sharp eye, a sharper tongue, and a long-standing reputation for never wasting words on anyone who didn't earn them. He rarely attended public events. When he did, people took notice. Tonight, however, he wasn't watching Tiffany Langston or her flashy entourage. He was watching Clarice. From the moment she entered, he hadn't taken his eyes off her. Not because of her gown, though it was stunning, but because of how she wore it. With quiet strength, with soul, with purpose. That he observed the beadwork, the cut, the seams that hugged her form and moved like liquid silk. It was the work of someone who understood not just fashion, but artistry, and he knew what he was seeing. Later in the evening, after another round of whispered questions and champagne refills, Dorian crossed the ballroom with deliberate steps and approached Clarice, who stood near the balcony, gazing out over the city skyline. That he cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me." She turned, poised, unbothered. "I know talent when I see it," he said. "You designed that gown, didn't you?" Clarice blinked, surprised, not by the question, but by the recognition in his voice. She raised an eyebrow. "Playful. How could you tell?" Dorian gave a half-smile, rare and fleeting. The details, the structure, that level of craftsmanship doesn't come from a rack. That dress was built, not bought. Clarice let out a soft chuckle, the kind that escaped before you could catch it. For the first time that night, she felt truly seen, not just admired for her transformation, not pitted, not praised for surviving, but recognized for who she truly was. She nodded. Yes, I designed it. Years ago. Dorian tilted his head. Ever think about designing again? Clarice glanced down at her glass. Every day, she admitted. But thinking and doing haven't always lined up. Maybe it's time they did, he said, with an intensity that felt less like a suggestion and more like a door opening. He gestured toward his table, filled with CEOs, editors, and other decision-makers who hadn't spared her a glance earlier in the night. Join me? Clarice hesitated, then gracefully nodded. Why not? As she walked with him, the shift in the room was immediate. People who had dismissed her now craned their necks. Smiles appeared where blank stares had once been. Introductions were made. Now they wanted her name. Now they wanted to shake her hand. But Clarice didn't rush to meet them. She let them come to her at Dorian's table. She spoke with quiet confidence, sharing bits of her past, her work, and her journey. Dorian listened more than he spoke, and that alone said everything. From across the room, Tiffany watched, her smile stretched thin like cheap elastic. She had hoped to humiliate Clarice, but instead, she had handed her the stage. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, Tiffany sauntered over, a glass of champagne in hand and a brittle laugh bubbling from her throat. Oh, Clarice, we were so surprised to see you here tonight. Clarice turned slowly, her expression unreadable, calm, cool, but her eyes were fire behind glass. She raised her champagne flute, took a small sip, and replied, not loudly, but clearly enough for every nearby ear to catch it. I was surprised to be invited. Boom! Silence. That Tiffany's smile twitched. There it was, the moment Tiffany realized she no longer had control of the narrative. Clarice didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had spoken with elegance, with restraint, and with a precision that left no room for comeback. Guests nearby glanced away awkwardly. Some stifled smiles. Dorian lifted his glass in a silent toast toward Clarice, his smirk betraying quiet approval. Clarice turned back to the balcony view, unfazed. She hadn't come to prove anything. She was the proof to be why the end of the night. People weren't asking why Clarice was there. They were asking where she'd been all this time. A week after the gala, Clarice's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her to answer. The voice on the other end was calm and measured. Clarice Evans. Yes, she said cautiously. This is Dorian Blackwell. Her breath caught slightly. She remembered him, the sharp-eyed investor from the gala who saw through the dress and into the hands that made it. I hope I'm not calling too early, he said. I've been thinking about your work. Clarice steadied herself. My work. The dress, Dorian said simply. The design. The craftsmanship. The way you carried it. You have something rare. Vision, skill, soul. I'd like to help you build something with it. Clarice blinked, stunned. For years, fashion had lived inside her like a forgotten language. She'd whispered it to herself in sketches and memories, but never believed she'd speak it aloud again. And now, someone was offering her the chance to shout it to the world. Within days, Dorian had arranged a meeting, not in a corporate boardroom, but in a warm, sunlit studio in the heart of the city. Bolts of fabric lined the walls. Mannequins stood like silent soldiers, waiting for new purpose. This could be yours, he said. He offered her startup capital, mentorship, and a team to help her grow. There were no strings attached. Just belief. Clarice cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but relief. For all the moments life had told her no, this was the yes that mattered. Together, they launched her brand. C. Royale, a fashion line inspired by elegance, resilience, and the kind of women the world underestimates until it can't ignore them anymore. Each collection told a story. One dress was named Shift, a nod to transformation. Another, Gilded Grace, paid tribute to her gold gala gown. Every piece was stitched with purpose, honoring not just beauty, but becoming. Within months, word spread. Articles popped up, from cleaning floors to couture queen, Clarice Evans is redefining elegance, the woman who turned a joke into a revolution. Fashion insiders scrambled to meet her. Designers she once admired now asked for collaborations. And Hawthorne Estates? It watched quietly from behind its wrought iron gates. Tiffany Langston and her circle never mentioned the infamous invitation again, not in public, not even in whispers. But they knew. They knew they had accidentally created a moment that would define them forever, and not in the way they hoped. Clarice never spoke ill of them. She didn't need to. She had always believed dignity didn't require revenge. But when she mailed out the invitations for her first major fashion show, she included one envelope addressed to Tiffany Langston. Inside was a personalized note and two front row seats, signed Clarice Evans, founder and lead designer, C. Royale. Tiffany showed up. She wore black, and she clapped, not because she wanted to, but because the room had already stood up to honor Clarice, and she couldn't sit in silence while the world applauded. That night, as the final model walked the runway in a gown that shimmered like dawn, Clarice stepped out in a tailored suit, modest heels, and a heart bursting with gratitude. The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. But she didn't just smile for the attention. She smiled for every woman who had ever been overlooked. For every late night, every missed opportunity, every whispered dream sewn together with thread and faith. And for the girl she used to be, scrubbing floors, pockets empty, still believing that someday would come, because it had. And it was bigger than she ever imagined. Clarice never forgot where she came from. But she also never let it define her, because queens don't just rise. They walk into rooms they were never meant to enter, and lift the room with them. If this story inspired you, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe for more true-to-life tales of unexpected power, dignity, and transformation. Sparkles crown, and remember, it's not about where you start. It's about how you show up. Crown sparkles.